I'm Phil Duxbury, the Dean of the College of Natural Science. Thank you all for joining us on this wonderful celebration. For both the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences, the College of Natural Science, and the university. Our program today will touch briefly on the importance of endowed positions for our university. And we'll talk about the prestigious positions and the effects they have on the university environment. We are pleased to be able to recognize and celebrate 4 outstanding individuals who are holders of endowed positions. Jeffrey Frey-Mueller, who holds the Thomas A. Vogel Endowed Chair of Geology and the Solid Earth, and Dalton Hardesty, Alan McNamara, and Sean Way, who are endowed professors of geological sciences. We'll start off the program with a few comments about the importance of endowed positions, and to get that started, I'll welcome Doug to the stage. Thanks for being here, Doug.
So I'm extremely pleased to be here representing Provost Youatt and Senior Vice President Steve Hsu, who could not attend today. You know, endowed chairs are the hallmark of great universities. They really, it's not just the funds that support our research, but it really allows us to recognize, retain, and recruit some outstanding individuals. And so it's really without question something that we value tremendously. And so it's a great honor to be here to recognize your achievements in this regard. So endowments also have another nice attribute, and that is that they continue on into the future forever. And so that allows us, again, it's something that no matter what the vagaries of funding that come to the university, we're able to continue support of excellence. And so that's something that, again, that's a unique thing for our institution. So today we're going to honor 4 individuals. We'll get to hear a little bit about what they do, which I think is going to be interesting and exciting. There will be a medallion ceremony at the end. Stay tuned for that. You know, some people like to wear those around for a few days when they're done, but you know, it's not necessary though. So I think we really do want to recognize you 4 as world-class individuals, and I think that's something that we are very proud of. So I'm going to, I'll return here in a bit, but in the interim return the stage to Dean Duxbury. But Jeff, Dalton, Alan, and Sean, congratulations.
So before we proceed to the really interesting part, which is hearing from the awardees, I want to say a few words about how important endowed positions are for the College of Natural Science, and to acknowledge the donors who are really a key part of our present and our future. And our development team works really hard to get these endowed positions in place, and your help with them is really important for us now and in the future. I also want to say that the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences is really, really good at generating these endowed positions. So congratulations for doing that, guys. And with that, I'll invite Dave to the stage, who's going to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. So we'll start with Jeff. Jeff Frey-Mueller joined our department in August 2018. He is an internationally recognized leader in the field of geodesy, which utilizes satellites from Global Positioning System to make precise measurements of movements of Earth's surface. His research activities are far-reaching, and he's made discoveries along a wide range of topics, including plate tectonics, plate boundary zones, fault dynamics, and the continuing rebound of Earth's surface from melting ice age glaciers, and both the inflation and deflation of volcanoes. On top of his high research productivity, Jeff is also well known for successful leadership. He's a director of EarthScope National Office, editor of the International Association of Geodesy's Symposium Series, recently served as the chair of the board of directors for UNAVCO, which is a nonprofit university-governed consortium that facilitates geoscience research. Jeff's also a U.S. representative for the International Association of Geodesy and the past chair of the U.S. Committee for the International Union of Geodesy and Geophysics. Before joining MSU, Jeff was a professor in the Geophysical Institute at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. He received his bachelor's degree at Caltech, his master's and PhD degrees from the University of South Carolina, and then worked as a postdoctoral researcher at Stanford University. Jeff's willingness to push the boundaries of both his scientific knowledge and administrative skills complement the energy and excitement building in our department. His expertise also fills an important gap in research and teaching at Michigan State University, creating a strong foundation for the growth of our department. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Jeff Freimueller, the Thomas A. Vogel Endowed Chair for Geology of Solid Earth.
All right, yeah, no pressure, huh? So yeah, as Dave said, I came here recently from Alaska, which appears on this slide here. And so I'm still getting used to Michigan. There are some differences, like that, for example. Also, when people talk about the something or other hills, I'm used to I'm used to something a little bigger than that. But when it comes to lakes, this place has got it. So this is Denali. This is it's actually called the Great One or the High One. That's what the name means in the original language, and tallest mountain in North America. So I came here. We actually arrived permanently in September. So around the middle of September, and hopefully you can see the pink line. So that was our epic journey. My wife and I, in 2 cars and a dog, came all the way to Michigan over 2 weeks. It was about 4,500 miles of driving, and through pretty spectacular Canadian Cordillera, and then actually some pretty cool stuff in the United States as well. And then we crossed the plains, and then we did go through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which was quite pretty. The other places I've been, lived, were actually all pretty much on the same view. I grew up in Southern California, went to college there, actually started graduate school at the University of Hawaii, which is actually just barely on this map here. Finished at University of South Carolina when my advisor moved, did a postdoc at Stanford, and then 23 years in Alaska before coming here to Michigan. So what I study is active geological processes. I study motion, deformation, and mass transport of the Earth's surface. And what that means is plate tectonics. It means faulting, active faulting and tectonics. It means volcanism. It means the cryosphere and effects of the cryosphere. So the main tools are high precision space geodetic measurements of position and gravity change. So these are measurements that couldn't be made when I was actually an undergraduate student in all cases. So new technologies and new tools that have just opened up new areas of research. So here's, again, a little bit washed out, but this is an example of GPS measurements. We're actually setting up this antenna over a little marker in the ground and measuring the position of this marker. And the position itself isn't all that interesting to most people, but we can measure it precisely enough that we can actually watch it move over time. And watching it move over time tells us about a variety of active processes on the Earth. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about my science just by showing you a few slides that show data, just observations, and we won't go into too many gory details here. This is what we would call a time series of positions. So the upper panel is latitude or north-south motion, and the bottom panel is longitude east-west motion. Each little dot is an individual daily measurement and has a little error bar on it, which you may or may not be able to see very clearly, but you can see it started out with some sort of trend, and then all of a sudden there was a jump. And then there was something curvy that happened after the jump. So what are these? This trend was caused by a variety of factors, including mostly long-term tectonics, but this jump was the result of an earthquake. So earthquakes not only shake the ground and so on, but also cause permanent displacement, permanent deformation of the Earth. That's because the earthquake is due to slip on a fault. There's actually motion happening within the Earth, and that deforms not just the area where the fault reaches the surface, but actually the whole, really the whole Earth, although when you get far enough away, it's really, really small. So this is what we would call a coseismic offset. It means it came with the earthquake. And then what we see, if we took the trend from before the earthquake, it would be this blue line. And the deviation from that is what we call post-seismic deformation. So not only does the earthquake cause an immediate effect, but the earthquake is essentially a redistribution of force within the earth. And that causes changes in the motion either of the fault zone itself or in the Earth's mantle. So the Earth's mantle is a viscoelastic material. That means over geologic timescales it flows like a fluid, whereas over very short timescales it behaves like a solid. So when you change the forces, you change the way the mantle and other similar kinds of parts of the Earth behave. So we use these measurements of coseismic and post-seismic deformation to first of all study the earthquake. And then these measurements here let us look at some of the dynamics behind tectonics on the planet. In this particular case, this is a site near Fairbanks, Alaska, and it's maybe at the very end of this time, which is 2018, 15 years after the earthquake, getting back to this original trend. But these transients from earthquakes last years to decades. And this is a way of looking at it in map view, and the colors are still not that great, are they? There's black arrows and green arrows. The green arrows are the big ones, if you can't tell the colors apart. The black was before the earthquake, and the green was an average of a period of time after the earthquake. So what we were seeing in time on the previous slide, this is mapping out in space how those changes occur. And essentially where the changes are big, which were in the areas maybe 50 kilometers away from the fault, so the earthquake ruptured along here, and some of these areas that were, say 25 to 75 kilometers away from the fault is where we see these maximum post-seismic displacements. And that's actually telling us that it's coming from a deep source. So it's coming mostly from the upper mantle at that, or the lower crust at that point. So another way that the Earth deforms under a changing force is to look at essentially weighing the water. So if we had undergraduates, I might not be able to use this analogy because they may never have actually seen a scale that didn't just have a digital readout. But you can still find grocery stores where you put your potatoes in the basket and a spring extends and it weighs your produce. Okay, so we can actually use the Earth to weigh the mass of water on the surface. And it really integrates surface water, snow and ice, groundwater, everything that's at or near the surface. And what we're looking at here is the height or the vertical motion of a site in southeast Alaska. It's on this little island in Lynn Canal near Juneau and near the Juneau ice field, which would be just beyond these mountains. So you can see the dots. The site goes up and down, up and down, up and down. It has a long-term trend that's up. That long-term uplift rate is 22 millimeters per year, so it's close to an inch per year, which is really, really fast for the Earth. And that's due to a combination of present-day ice loss and post-Little Ice Age ice loss. So essentially the last glacier advance in the region hit its maximum in the 1700s and has been declining since then and declining much more rapidly through the 20th century and even more rapidly through the 21st century. So that's what's contributing mostly to this uplift. But the seasonal up and down of the surface, which is about a 30 millimeter peak to trough signal, is actually due to the accumulation and melt of snow. That is the dominant part. There would also be some other water components in there, but the snow turns out to be the biggest here. So really, the Earth's surface is going up and down that much here on an annual basis as the water mass change. And you can see in the scale here, that's 6 centimeters and so on, but you can see this signal quite clearly. There's definitely some noise, but it's way bigger than the noise. So we're able to actually learn quite a bit about these kinds of processes. This is pretty extreme, but it's even more extreme in some places. If you go to the Amazon, you can find up to 8 centimeters peak to trough seasonal deformation due to the water loading in the Amazon. So really enormous signals that we're very well capable of measuring. Here's a Michigan example. Again, the map is a little bit washed out, but this is the Straits of the Mackinac Straits here. So this is a site that's on the edge of Lake Michigan. Traverse City is down here somewhere. And this is not my own analysis. It comes from the University of Nevada, Reno. And this just shows the vertical component. So the scale is in millimeters, so there's a centimeter right there. And there's a red line, which you can't see very well, but it's actually all right, because the red line I don't think actually makes much sense. It's what they did in just assuming a seasonal term. But you can see this sort of long period variations in the vertical motion of this site. And that's dominated by lake loading. The other signal we'll see across Michigan is a very slow upward tilt to the north, which is the response to the previous melting of the ice sheets. We still see that response, but these short-term variations are probably entirely due to lake loading. So there's actually quite a few sites in Michigan. We'll see what we can see in terms of lake loading on these sort of interannual and also perhaps some very short time scales. We should be able to see the redistribution of water in storms, for example, should actually produce a measurable signal in these data. Okay, so what will I be studying here? And this is my last slide. So this is just, some of these are ongoing things that I'm continuing, and some new things I'll start. But be looking at slip variations and subduction zones. So subduction zones, where one plate pushes under the other, is where the greatest earthquakes on the planet occur. And what we want to do is look at how the slip on that interface happens in space and time, whether it's steady, whether it's episodic, and so on. So not just looking at earthquakes, but actually looking at steady motions and also kind of creep events that occur in these faults that produce the biggest earthquakes. So we'll look in Alaska, also revisit some areas in Central and South America as well. I'll continue to look at large-scale continental deformation. This is really sort of in Alaska and China, where I've been working for a number of years. Why are plate boundaries in the continents so broadly distributed and complex? So India is colliding with the Eurasian plate, and it produces over more than 1,000 kilometers. It produces earthquakes, active deformation across most of China. Okay, so understanding how these processes occur and why they are the way they are is a long-term problem that I've been working on for quite a while. I'll work on post-glacial rebound, hydrologic loading, and sea level. So how does the Earth surface respond to changing surface lows, and how does this affect relative sea level change? So actually one of the biggest impacts in the variation of sea level change from place to place actually comes from the deformation of the solid Earth. And so this is something that we can work on and model. And active volcanism and lithospheric loading. I'm actually going to start some new things in Hawaii and perhaps in Iceland, looking at whether these islands are actually continue to subside under the growing weight of the volcanoes. So again, the mass added to the volcano by continual intrusion of magma up from the mantle, whether it's erupted or whether it stays intruded below the surface, is ultimately causing the islands to subside. Can we measure that, or also what could be happening in the deep roots of the magmatic systems? And right now, the measurement networks in these places are not well posed for looking at these deep problems. People are looking at the shallow parts of the systems, but by looking at the deep parts of the systems, it's a long-term project, a long-term need for data, but that has some unique opportunities. And that's something that I can actually use this endowment and the endowment funds to get going when it's something that you can't do in a 3-year NSF project, but something that might require a decade. So we can get that started with the endowment funds, and hopefully eventually get money to actually do that science. And well, if not, then maybe we'll just do it anyway. That's sort of the, the beauty of having some resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. So I'm now pleased to introduce Dalton Hardesty, who's an endowed assistant professor of geological sciences. So Dalton joined our department last August, and his research places constraints on how ocean chemistry and early animal life co-evolved with the emergence and proliferation of oxygenic photosynthesis over billion-year timescales, and how ocean chemistry is archived in marine sediments. His work attempts to reconstruct how ancient seawater contrasts that of today. Dalton's interest in science began very early. He hails from the coal mining town of Linton, Indiana, where his great-grandfather, grandfather, and father all worked in the mining industry. The unusual appearance of water and streams around his home piqued Dalton's interest in water chemistry. Visits to his father's job and summers spent working in the coal mines exposed Dalton to the region's geology. Concerns about widespread acid mine drainage from derelict coal mines provided the initial spark for his doctoral research. His desire to teach then came from his mother, who set that example as a teacher. Dalton received his bachelor's and master's degree from Indiana University and then his PhD from University of California, Riverside, then worked as a postdoctoral scholar at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in Massachusetts. Dalton recently had the opportunity to visit hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean in the Alvin submarine. You may remember the Alvin from the opening scenes of the movie Titanic, where basically the Alvin went along and looked at the remains of that shipwreck. The vent fields there are unique features where magma-heated water escapes from the seafloor, and the location where he actually went was only discovered about 10 years ago. So very few people have ever seen that firsthand, and Dalton is one of the few. This is just one example of Dalton's distinctive approach to his research that we're excited that he brings to Michigan State University. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dalton Hardesty.
Seems you all recognize this site. And so, I know that most of you here have been through the Natural Science Building. If not, maybe you've traveled around Michigan. And so it may make sense to you that every day at work, coming in and out of the building, that it's not difficult, in the importance of understanding Earth's history and its importance to our state in general is it's a constant reminder. And so I think that there's no better place to contemplate the history of life and what it has to teach us about our future, as well as the potential for habitable worlds even beyond our own, than lying across a 2.5 billion-year-old piece of Van Nuys formation from the Upper Peninsula. My research focuses on understanding the Earth's ocean and atmosphere chemistry and the ties that has to biological evolution. And this focus is really on the last 4 billion years, which, Earth is 4.5 billion years old. And that's because the oldest known life on Earth extends back to 4 billion years ago, and that comes from chemical signatures found in ancient rocks. And a major focus of that research comes on molecular oxygen, which is a key player in this story. And so, even though Earth's first life was microbial, it didn't require oxygen for survival, and it lived in environments that were devoid of oxygen. The evolution of photosynthesis really shaped our planet in the preceding 3 billion years record that we have in the geologic record. And even the earliest and simplest animals require oxygen to survive, and as we do today. This area of research has overlaps with multiple fields, including future climate change. I apply geochemistry as my tools, Earth history and biological evolution, which I mentioned, as well as astrobiology, or the study of environments that may host life, extreme environments that host life, and the potential to find those environments on other planets. And so research like this is becoming particularly important even as we speak now. There was a recent launch of the James Webb Space Telescope, which is looking to characterize exoplanet atmospheres, and Earth's history may provide a guide to the types of places that we may be able, the types of environments that may exist outside of our solar system that could host life. Because there's been, as I'll show, dramatic changes in our own planet's atmospheric composition over time. And so, the truth is, however, though, that our planet is unique, and despite our best efforts and ongoing efforts, it is the only planet that we know of that hosts life. And therefore, it acts as our best point of study to understand a planet that does host life. And so you can tell that even from afar. So looking here at a spectra of Earth's atmosphere from satellites, you would know that there is abundant oxygen, that the Earth's atmosphere maintains water. It also has important greenhouse gases and gases that are indicative of biology, such as methane accumulating. And today, the abundance of oxygen in our atmosphere is something close to 21%. However, it hasn't always been that way. And that kind of gets at the key of my research group and some things we've looked at before and going forward here at MSU. So shown here is a curve of a reconstruction of atmospheric oxygen concentrations through time. And those are shown at percent relative to today's levels. And as you can see that there have, over the last 3 billion years, or at least 3 billion year record of oxygen accumulation, that there have been rises and falls, and throughout that entire time period, Earth has sustained life. Which means that each of these individual, these past intervals could be an ancient atmosphere that could tell us something about life beyond our own, in other solar systems. And tells us something about the limits of life in general. And our toolbox to put together quantitative curves like this for oxygen or other gases that accumulate in the atmosphere is shown here, and I've tried to highlight some things you can't, may be difficult to see, they look bolded here, but such as vanadium, chromium, manganese, iron, you can see nitrogen, carbon, sulfur, one of my favorite elements, iodine, and these are elements that are reactive with oxygen, and that we can use their presence in the rock record to say something about past accumulations of oxygen, but also the effects of these kinds of environmental changes on their own biogeochemical cycles. And so the study of their isotope compositions and their concentrations in specific minerals and rocks, like atmospheric spectra of fossils, can tell us something about life in co-involving environments on early Earth. And so we do spend a lot of time scavenging the rock record, but actually a lot of this work involves studying modern analog environments. And so, these give us clues to the kinds of mechanisms that may drive the observations that we make in the rock record. And so what's driving these global changes? And so as an example, just last July, I spent time on the research vessel Falkor in an oxygen minimum zone in the Pacific Ocean, and where we performed experimental incubations to understand the limits of oxygen limits of microbial metabolisms, very specific metabolisms, and to as clues to what may be driving changes in the same elemental cycles that are observed in some of these proxies that tell us about global change in the past. And so this is particularly important because though these environments are rare now, they likely represented, these anoxic environments or low oxygen environments, likely represented much of Earth's oceans for the first 4.2 billion years of its 4.5 billion year history. So they're just a sliver of the ocean today, but very important in the context of Earth history. And they're becoming more and more relevant because in combination with warming of the planet, there's observations that oxygen concentrations in some of these same oxygen minimum zones are decreasing, and these oxygen minimum zones are expanding. And so the past record of these kind of environments and the processes, the chemical processes occurring within them are really important at this time to understand the effects on the surrounding ecosystems going into the future. And so, as another kind of another example of an analog environment, Dave mentioned at the beginning that I recently had the opportunity to travel on the human-occupied vehicle Alvin to about 1.5 miles below the seafloor to look at hydrothermal vent fields. And these are settings where superheated water is discharging from the seafloor. And again, they're a unique environment today, but they are thought to have had a very important role in ocean chemistry throughout much of its past, as well as potentially being a very important spot for the initial evolution of life itself. And so one piece of evidence for this is the actual banded iron formation that stands out front of our own natural science building, which is a testament to an anoxic ocean where iron-rich waters from hydrothermal vents were allowed to expand throughout much of the world's oceans and be deposited. And so, with that, I just want to finish by pointing out that going forward, our research group is working on applying and developing isotope tracer techniques to understand the processes driving these global changes that are observed in the past, as well as reconstructing these past environments. And a lot of this is going to be happening thanks to a new clean room, which is largely metal-free, that is under construction now in the chemistry building. And that I would like to particularly thank the students, faculty, staff, administration, donors who supported this lab, as well as my position, and who are supporting the research going forward in MSU. And I just want to say as well that I'm particularly proud and feel a sense of responsibility to have one of these positions, ADAL positions, and that I take it very seriously, and that I'm looking forward to being a leader within the department and helping the department maintain its status as leaders going forward. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dalton. Next up, we have Alan McNamara, Endowed Professor of Geological Sciences. Alan joined the department in August 2016. His research is aimed at understanding the structure, dynamics, and evolution of Earth's interior. He investigates how convection within the deep interior cools the planet, drives plate tectonics, and controls volcanism at the surface. If you ask Alan, he'll tell you that our own Dave Long made a big impact in his life. As an undergrad at MSU in 2001, he was sitting there and opened up his world to geoscience. Although he was studying physics at the time, once he took that class, he just couldn't shake his interest in the subject. Despite some friendly ribbing from his friends and colleagues in physics, he chose to stay in the geosciences. And he received a bachelor's in both geology and physics from MSU before going to University of Michigan for his master's and PhD. He then did postdoctoral work at University of Colorado and joined Arizona State University before coming back to his alma mater. Alan has contributed to the geosciences community through his service to the American Geophysical Union. He's been part of the organizing leadership since 2008, and that includes being a member of the program committee, serving as president of the Deep Earth section, sitting on the American Geophysical Union Council, which is a high-level position. Alan is excited to help shape the department that helped him shape his career. He's currently the graduate director and serves on the advisory committee, has also worked on every single search that we have had since he arrived. Thank you very much. So what that means is he has actually served to help hire all the people that we're celebrating today. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Alan McNamara.
Okay, this is just up here to mesmerize you while I'm talking, so you don't really have to listen to me. I wanted to first just express my great appreciation for the donors' contributions here. I think this is a big deal. As a fellow alum, this is really quite personal for me. As Dave mentioned, I was an undergraduate here, and I was mostly a physics student, and then halfway through I took Dave Long's Intro Geology course. That changed my life. That opened my eyes to a whole new world. Dave was a great teacher, and it was a great course. And I stayed the course with physics, because no self-respecting physicist would even mess around with this dirty geology stuff. But I couldn't shake geology out of my head. I was thinking about it all the time, and I kept fantasizing about what would it be like to be a geologist. How exciting. And then about the time that I was applying to graduate school for physics, I made a life decision that was the best decision I've ever made. And I decided no, I'm going to stay and be a geologist. I'm not going to be a physicist. I didn't know about geophysics then. But around that time, I had a conversation with one of my physics professors, Bill Hartman. I think he's still around today, and I should go visit him sometime. But we had a conversation, and he asked me, he said, "Have you ever contemplated geophysics?" And I was like, what? Never heard of this geophysics. What is that? And he told me a little bit about it. I was instantly intrigued. Like, this was the best solution, right? And so that day I called the department, and that night I talked to Kaz Fujita. And everyone that knows Kaz knows that he tirelessly and unselfishly mentors undergraduates, and he did with me. And I probably wouldn't have gotten to grad school without his good tips that he had. But that night I talked to him, and he taught me about geophysics. And I was hooked. And I immediately became a double major. And the important thing is I found a home in the department there. And I had incredible teachers like Dave Long, Kaz Fujita, Bill Cambry, who's sitting here today, Tom Vogel, Michael Valbell, Danita Brandt. These people opened my eyes to a new world And it was a world that I could share my love of physics along with my love of geology. And I even learned a little bit of chemistry along the way. Being here in this department changed my life, and it really built a strong foundation for my future career. And I really appreciate it. And I keep thinking back about all of the things I learned from Kaz and Tom Vogel, and those things really shaped my lifelong interests in things such as plate tectonics and understanding how the mantle works here. So it's weird how life works sometimes. So I came back full circle. Now I'm back home, and I'm proudly back home. I'm very happy to be here. The contributions from the donor really made this happen. In fact, that donor has planted a seed, a very powerful seed, that has just begun to grow, and has breathed new life into this department. And it's a really powerful thing. I see the excitement in the wider community. Whenever I travel around to other departments or go to workshops or seminars, I often hear the same question, and that question is, what the heck are you guys doing at Michigan State? You're going nuts, in a good way. And I'm very proud of that, and that's only possible because of these donations. So I want to say to the donor, thank you very much. You have incredibly changed this place, and we all appreciate it very much. And I also want to say to my old professors, a couple of them are here. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm happy to be among you now, and you've really changed my life for the better, and I really appreciate it, and I'll always remember you for that. But okay, so this movie was just here to mesmerize you. I just want to leave off on this figure here. This is an old cartoon from 1945, so about 75 years ago, and this was made by Arthur Holmes. Arthur Holmes is considered the father of geodynamics, but that's not what he's famous for. He's famous for his work on geochronology, radioactive decay, and dating the age of the Earth. A few decades before this, or a couple decades at least, maybe a little bit longer, Alfred Wegener proposed this idea of continental drift. And continental drift that proposal was based on some really exciting observations, but there were not any great mechanisms to explain how it could happen, and people really didn't believe that continents could plow through the oceans. So that idea never took hold, and in fact it was kind of ridiculed quite a bit. But Arthur Holmes was intrigued by this, and later on with his work in radioactivity, he recognized that the mantle is radioactive. It's producing a lot of heat. That heat has to come out of the Earth. And conduction is too slow of a mechanism, of a thermal transport mechanism for that heat to come out. So the mantle must be convecting. And if the mantle is convecting, you're going to have areas where you have divergence causing tension. You're going to have areas where you have convergence causing compression. And what that will do is that could break the surface apart, make a new ocean where you have the tension, and it could pull the surface down back into the mantle where you have compression. And so Arthur Holmes provided a mechanism for plate tectonics. But it was another 25 years before anyone took plate tectonics seriously, and that really involved new exploration of the ocean bottoms, the bathymetry and the magnetic lineations and all of that. So about 25 years after this, plate tectonics became a credible theory, and since then, so for the last 50 years, we've learned an incredible amount about the surface of the Earth and the kinematics of plate tectonics. And even as Jeff showed today, we can see things happening in real time now. We know plate tectonics happens, and we know a lot of the kinematics of all of the faulting and the processes involved with it. However, we still don't know much about what drives plate tectonics. We don't know what causes plate tectonics. We're pretty sure it's mantle convection that does so. And so that's what I work on. I work on trying to understand how the mantle convects, how it cools the Earth, how it stirs the chemistry inside the Earth, which will come up as lavas in certain locations, and ultimately how it drives plate tectonics. And I do that through numerical modeling. So I think that's about my time, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. The fourth and final endowed faculty that I'll introduce today is Sean Way. Sean joined us this last January in 2018. He's a seismologist with broad interests in Earth's mantle structures, particularly those associated with subduction zones. His recent work focuses on imaging seismic structures of the Tonga Lau subduction system, intermediate depth seismicity in that region, and the mantle transition zone. Sean always knew he wanted to be a scientist and was inspired by the late Stephen Hawking. Though he considered studying theoretical physics, he eventually realized he was more interested in a tangible subject matter. Sean developed his love of geology through fieldwork and took every opportunity he could to participate in it. Those early field experiments taught him to respect the effort involved in every piece of data collection. From digging a hole to shipping out to the middle of the ocean, he realized behind every data point is someone else's physical labor. That reverence is now expressed through the way Sean uses data in his research, and importantly, is now being passed on to the next generation of students through both fieldwork and his data analysis. Sean received his bachelor's and master's degrees from Peking University in Beijing, China, and moved to the United States, where he received his PhD from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Most recently, he was a postdoctoral fellow at Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego. After starting here at MSU, he was really impressed with the friendly and collegial atmosphere that he encountered in the department. Although weather was a bit of a change for him, he's really been very positive about the environment here and excited to build his career here, and I couldn't agree more. I'm proud to introduce you to Dr. Sean Wei.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you all for being here. And it's my great honor to receive this endowment and also got the chance to talk a little about my research here. And as you see, this is a photo I took a couple of years ago. I really fascinated by fieldwork, and although I got very bad seasick during that cruise, but I'm still trying very hard to going back to the ocean. So you see that one of my major research themes is about Earth deep water cycle, and as I said, I like fieldwork. So I want to start this talk with one of my favorite places called Tonga. So this is a map of part of the Pacific Ocean. That's Australia, and this is New Zealand. So this is a tiny kingdom called Tonga, and that dark stripe is Tonga Trench, where the Pacific plate is subducting beneath the Australian plate. Now we know that, okay, it has the fastest convergence rate in the Earth, and therefore we believe that it is the coldest slab in the upper mantle, with, of course, numerous earthquakes. But Tonga is also kind of special for us seismologists and geophysicists, because about half a century ago, Jack Oliver and his students went to Tonga and collected some data, and for the first time got this kind of image. And can you tell me what that is? That's called the slab, right? Subduction zone slab. But at that time, they didn't know that. So they called it, Jack Oliver called it the anomalous structure. Because if you look at the date, it was just a few months before Dan Mackenzie, Rob Parker, and Jason Morgan published their revolutionary papers to finally establish the theory of tectonics, plate tectonics. So to me, this place really is the place where humans first discovered subduction slabs. If you remember what Alan showed the cartoon in the previous talk, that cartoon didn't really have a slab. And now we know that. Okay, you may ask, that's half a century ago. What do we know now? Now we know that not only the solid rocks are going down, but also these rocks are bringing water into deep earth. And first stage is over here near the Tonga Trench. And that's where the minerals are reacting with the seawater to form hydrous minerals. And then hydrous minerals can bring water, not the liquid water, but the hydroxyl sometimes, to great depth. However, at greater depth, when temperature and pressure are too high, then these hydrous minerals will break down, and releasing water into the mantle wedge over here help melt the mantle wedge and producing magma eventually erupt onto the surface through volcanoes. And this process we call dehydration of the slab, that's also associated with these yellow stars, those earthquakes. And now let me put the cartoon on the right side, and on the left side is a real case. Here, let's just zoom in a very small portion of the Tonga slab. The blue colors here indicates the temperature of the Tonga slab, which is very cold compared to the warm temperature of mantle wedge. And you see all these colorful dots, if you kind of see that. Those are all earthquakes. But why these earthquakes are special? Because we believe that at this depth, more than a few hundred kilometers depth, we believe that mantle rocks should behave like silly putty. You don't expect any brittle fracture in silly putty, right? But we do see earthquakes. So what's going on there? And my research, along with many, many previous studies, suggests that these earthquakes are triggered by the dehydration reactions I mentioned earlier, that's releasing water back to the surface. And what's special in Tonga is that because it's the fastest, also the coldest slab, therefore these earthquakes occurred at about 200, 250 kilometers depth, where by comparison, the similar dehydration reactions occurs at about 150 kilometers in Japan. That's another famous subduction zone. Okay, here are those earthquakes, just a clue, and my student Fan right now is trying to use a very specific seismic waves to try to directly image those hydrous minerals. Can we see where does water go? That's our goal, one of our goals. And what's more exciting is that although we usually believe that earthquakes and dehydration reactions occurred at about 150 kilometers depth in Japan, but shortly after I arrived at MSU, that's why I appreciate our department and our atmosphere here, is that I was very lucky to collaborate with Dr. Min Chen, also our faculty member in our department. Then we found that since besides the regular dehydration reactions over here, we also find some even deeper dehydration reactions. That's a clue that water can go even deeper, more than 300 kilometers. Now, given the time, so I try to wrap up again using this cartoon, and all these blue arrows related to my previous study that I try to figure out what does water play an important role for one process of plate tectonics. As you see here, water gets involved in hydration of the hydrating the plate, and also got dehydration triggering earthquakes. And also in the middle of nowhere, seems we found clues that water is rising up through the mantle transition zone. But now back to the title here is the water cycle. So I want to draw a cycle. Apparently there are some gaps of knowledge. For example, over here, that's a little bit dark. We know that earthquakes, larger earthquakes and tremors are occurring at the depth of about a few tens of kilometers. But what's the role of water at those depths? There are some clues, but we are not clear. And also we know most water will return back to the surface, but there could be a trace amount of water going down, and that's directly related to, can control the viscosity of our mantle. And over here you see that I draw some blue arrows point up, but where is the source of those water? And more fundamentally, is there any connection between this downgoing water and the upwelling water? You see, there are a lot of question markers here. I feel I'm very fortunate to start my career at MSU, and hopefully in the next few decades, I can solve some or all of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was really very interesting and well done. So I really appreciate it. And now we get on to the part where the big medals are hung around your neck. And Doug is going to do the honors there.
So, as you can imagine, I've been to more than a few of these investitures, and I want to thank each of you. I think your gracious comments about the donors were really magnificent, so thanks for that. Haven't done that? Yes. So, Jeff, please.
So that ends the formal part of the afternoon, and I'd like to thank everybody for coming. This has been a wonderful event, and now we get a chance to celebrate. Next door, there's a reception. I hope you will all stay and join us. Thank you very much.